I sit at a corner table in the busy restaurant, my eyes fixed on the cheap, wrinkled $15 coupon clutched in my hand. My fingers tremble, not from sadness, but from a burning anger that courses through me like wildfire. I remember the moment Samantha, my wife, had pressed it into my palm earlier that evening. It was supposed to be a birthday gift, a token of thoughtfulness from the woman I had loved, supported, and sacrificed so much for. Yet here I am, seething with rage as I realize the cruel message behind that insignificant piece of paper. Around me, the chatter and laughter of the upscale diners blend into an indistinct hum, but all I can hear are the mocking voices in my head. I recall Samantha sitting at the head of the table, sipping expensive wine with her elite friends, their laughter cutting into me like a knife. I can still hear her light, dismissive tone when she said, "Oh, come on, Ryan, don't be so dramatic," as she raised her glass. I remember the biting comment that followed. "It's practical. You've always struggled, right?" As if my failures were a well-known joke among them. Every word echoed in my mind like a relentless taunt. Struggled? I had given everything to build a life, to support her dreams, and yet I was made to feel like a failure, as if I were nothing more than a burden. Even her father, Henry Blake, with his cold, unfeeling eyes and dismissive tone, made it clear that I would never be good enough for his daughter. His muttered words, "You should be grateful. Samantha arranged this whole dinner for you," still burn in my ears. I can almost feel the smirk on his face, the look of condescension that made me shrink inside myself. In that moment, surrounded by the laughter of those who saw me as weak, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not remain the punchline of their cruel jokes. My hand shakes as I pull out my phone, and a notification pops up that changes everything. The message reads, "Confirmed acquisition finalized. Blake Enterprises is now under my control." A surge of vindication rushes through me. The company that Samantha worshipped, the empire her father had built and flaunted with pride, is now mine. I can almost taste the irony. Tomorrow, when she wakes up, she will find herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. I replay the events in my mind. Years of being looked down upon, mocked, and treated as if I were nothing more than a failure. All the sacrifices I had made, all the long nights and hard work I had put in, had been unnoticed by her and her circle of elites. And now, the tables have turned. I lean back in my chair and let my eyes drift over the elegant decor of the restaurant. The expensive wine, the carefully chosen lighting, the perfectly set table. It all seemed like a stage set for a performance in which I had been cast as the villain. But no more. In that single moment, holding a paltry coupon that symbolized everything wrong in our lives, I realized that I held the power to rewrite my story. Each breath I take is filled with determination, and every beat of my heart pounds a message of retribution. I am no longer the man who silently endured humiliation. I am the man who now controls the empire, and with it, my destiny. I close my eyes for a brief moment, feeling the cool metal of the phone against my skin as I hold on to that life-altering message. My mind races with the possibilities, and a cold smile creeps across my face. I remember every slight, every cruel word, every dismissive laugh. Tonight, as I sit here in the midst of their revelry, I know that my life is about to change forever. Tomorrow, when Samantha wakes to a reality far harsher than any birthday gift could ever be, she will understand the true cost of her choices. And I, with every fiber of my being, will be there to watch her world crumble. For as long as I can remember, my life had been a series of quiet defeats, a long parade of humiliation that no one else seemed to notice but me. I recall the days when I was the punchline of every joke told by those who looked down on me. Even though I had graduated top of my class in business, I was never given a chance at Blake Enterprises. Henry Blake, Samantha's father, always insisted that I was not cut out for the corporate world, and his words burned in my mind like acid. Every rejection, every dismissive glance, and every cruel remark carved another notch in the wall of my dignity. I remember the first time I walked into a meeting at Blake Enterprises, full of hope and ambition, only to be met with stifled laughter and cold stares. It was then that I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I would always be seen as an outsider, a failure who did not deserve to be near the empire that Samantha's family had built. There was a time when Samantha, my wife, had been my rock. In the early days of our relationship, she believed in me with a passion that made me feel invincible. We dreamed together, and I worked day and night to build a future for us both. But as the years passed, something shifted. Samantha became entangled in the glittering world of her wealthy friends, and slowly, she started to see me not as the man who had once shared her hopes, but as someone who fell short of the high standards expected of her. I witnessed the change in her eyes each time she rolled her eyes at my small business ventures or made a snide remark comparing my modest achievements to the dazzling success of the husbands of her elite friends. Those moments stung deeply, not only because of the words themselves, but because they echoed the silent rejection that I had endured for years. Every evening, while I stayed late at my modest office or worked tirelessly on projects that barely made a ripple, I felt the weight of every failure pressing down on me. My heart ached with a mixture of longing and resentment as I realized that the dreams I had nurtured were slipping further away with each passing day. I had built my own empire in the shadows, investing every spare moment into acquiring small assets and planning for a future that only I seemed to believe in. I learned to appreciate the quiet power of perseverance, even when those around me scoffed at my ambitions. Despite the constant barrage of insults and the seemingly endless list of disappointments, I refused to let their opinions define me. In the midst of this emotional storm, I clung to one truth. I was more than the sum of their dismissals. Every harsh word and every condescending smile fueled my determination to prove them wrong. I began to see each slight as a stepping stone, a necessary hardship that would eventually lead me to a victory that they could not even imagine. Even as Samantha's laughter and Henry's cold remarks echoed in my mind, I spent long nights poring over financial reports and legal documents, constructing a strategy that would change everything. It was a slow and agonizing process, built on years of sacrifice, secret planning, and the quiet accumulation of power in places they never looked. I remember the days when I would return home to our modest apartment, my shoulders heavy with the burden of unmet expectations, and I would stand before the mirror questioning every decision I had ever made. I questioned if I had ever been truly capable of greatness or if I was doomed to be the underdog, forever living in the shadows of those who looked down on me. Yet, with every tear shed in silence and every sleepless night spent strategizing, I grew more determined. I realized that while they saw my struggles as proof of my inadequacy, they failed to see the strength that had been forged in the fires of adversity. Each moment of humiliation was not a mark of defeat, but a lesson in resilience. Now, as I stand on the brink of a turning point, I can almost taste the sweet flavor of retribution. I have built something remarkable in the quiet recesses of my life, a plan that would one day bring the very empire that had so humiliated me into my own hands. The years of humiliation have not broken me. They have sharpened my resolve. I am no longer the man who cowered under the weight of others' expectations. Instead, I have become the architect of my destiny, using every insult and every sneer as fuel for the grand scheme that is slowly unfolding. I remember the cold, early morning light as I arrived at Blake Enterprises, a place that had long been a symbol of the power and pride of the family that had scorned me. The building stood tall, its glass facade reflecting the pale sky as I made my way through the secure parking lot. I felt a chill run down my spine, not from fear, but from excitement and determination. Today was the day I would show them that I was not the weak, insecure man they thought I was. In the executive parking lot, my partner Isaac Ford waited for me. His eyes carried a mixture of resolve and quiet satisfaction as he handed me the final acquisition papers. "They're panicking," he murmured, his words confirming what had been growing inside me for years. I knew that Samantha was inside the building, completely unaware of the storm that was about to change her world. Every step I took today would alter the fate of Blake Enterprises forever. As I stepped through the glass doors, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Employees cast curious and bewildered glances my way. They only remembered me as Samantha's unsuccessful husband, a man who was never taken seriously by the powerful elite who filled these halls. But they did not know that I had spent countless hours in silence, gathering strength, building alliances, and planning every detail of this final move. The elevator ride to the executive floor was a brief pause filled with memories of long nights spent poring over legal documents and financial reports. I recalled every whispered insult, every slight that had once made me doubt my worth. Now, each memory fueled my determination to seize control and claim the respect I had always deserved. The boardroom was already abuzz with activity when I entered. Henry Blake sat at the head of the table, his confident demeanor faltering for a split second as he noticed me. Samantha, poised and elegant as ever, maintained her composure, but I could see a flash of uncertainty in her eyes. The top executives, who had once followed her father's unyielding commands, now looked on with wide eyes and growing unease. I walked slowly to the head of the table, every step measured and deliberate. The final acquisition papers, a document that symbolized years of quiet planning and relentless effort, lay in my briefcase. I took a deep breath, the moment heavy with the weight of long-suffered humiliation and the promise of imminent change. I pulled out a chair and sat down at the head of the table, letting my eyes sweep over the stunned faces before me. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady and firm. Today marks a turning point for this company. I paused as I saw the first flicker of panic in their eyes. For too long, I have worked in the shadows, gathering every small victory and learning from every failure. Today, I stand before you as the new owner of Blake Enterprises. The room fell into a deep, uneasy silence. I could see Samantha's eyes widen with disbelief and fear, and Henry's confident expression crumbling as he reached for the papers with trembling hands. Each heartbeat echoed in the quiet, a reminder of all the years I had been underestimated, all the moments I had been made to feel small and insignificant. I continued, my words measured and clear. Every moment of doubt, every insult, and every slight I endured was a lesson that built the foundation for today. I have spent years planning, saving, and learning the art of business, while many of you saw only a failure. Today, I reclaim not just a company, but my dignity and my future. I watched as the tension in the room grew thicker, the once familiar faces now etched with shock and uncertainty. Samantha's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting between me and the legal documents that now lay as a symbol of my triumph. Henry's silence was deafening. It spoke of a loss of control he had never anticipated. Every word I spoke was a reminder of the long journey I had taken, a journey filled with hardship, rejection, and the slow burning of resolve. I recalled the late nights working in solitude, the endless rejections from the very people who were meant to support me, and the quiet promise I had made to myself that I would never be defined by their opinions. Now, in the glare of that boardroom's lights, those years of struggle had materialized into a single, decisive act. I looked directly at Samantha, the woman who had once been my partner in dreams and in life, and said, "This is not merely a change in ownership. It is a declaration that I am no longer to be underestimated." The final acquisition papers lay on the table, a clear, undeniable record of my victory. I could sense the shift in power. The room was no longer filled with the smug assurance of those who had always looked down on me, but with the dawning realization that the underdog had risen. In that moment, the silent hum of the room was replaced by the pounding of my own heart, echoing the promise of a future that was now mine to command. I had transformed years of pain and humiliation into a single act of retribution, one that left no doubt. The final move had been made, and it was irreversible. Sitting there, with the weight of every past slight balanced against the newfound power that now radiated from me, I felt a calm certainty. I had seized control not through brute force, but through the quiet strength of perseverance and the relentless pursuit of justice. Today was not only the day I took over a company, it was the day I took back my identity. In that boardroom, where fear and uncertainty replaced arrogance and entitlement, I had made my mark. I knew that the battle was far from over, but in that moment, with every eye fixed on me, I understood that the final move was complete. The power, the respect, and the future that had once been denied to me were now mine. I entered the boardroom with a slow, deliberate step that echoed my quiet determination. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Samantha's lips curled into a smirk as she saw me, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Ryan, sweetheart, I'm a little busy." "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice light, but laced with disbelief. I ignored the playful tone and reached into my briefcase, retrieving a neatly arranged stack of legal documents. The papers, crisp and final, were the culmination of every long, sleepless night and every whispered doubt. I slid the documents across the table toward her with measured calm, watching as her manicured fingers hesitated before picking them up. For a long, excruciating moment, I observed her reaction. The color drained from her face, replaced by a cold shock that could be seen even in the subtle twitch of her eyes. Henry, who sat stiffly beside her, snatched up the papers almost as if they were dangerous contraband. His hands trembled slightly as he began to read the first line, and I could almost feel the panic that had been building up in the room. The line "finalized acquisition of Blake Enterprises" stood out like a beacon of my triumph. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms, the gesture signaling that nothing could be done to change what had just occurred. A heavy silence fell over the room as every person present tried to make sense of the scene unfolding before them. Samantha's eyes darted between me and the documents, her expression a mix of shock and anger. This is a joke," she stammered, her voice betraying a fear she tried desperately to hide behind mockery. I simply smirked, enjoying the rare moment when she was stripped of her usual arrogance. "Not at all, dear wife," I replied in a tone that was calm and cold, leaving no room for any argument. I could see the shifting dynamics in that room. The high-end decor, the polished table, and the elegant chairs had all borne silent witness to years of dismissals and humiliation. Now, they were the stage for the ultimate reversal. Every slight that had been hurled at me over the years seemed to converge into this single, definitive moment. I recalled the nights spent poring over legal contracts and business reports, each page a quiet act of rebellion against the disdain I had suffered. Each one had led to this point, when I could finally hold the power that had always been denied to me. Henry's face was a mixture of disbelief and rage. I could see his carefully constructed composure crumble as he read on, his eyes narrowing with the realization that his long-held control was slipping away. Samantha, once so confident in her own superiority, now appeared vulnerable, her facade cracking as she struggled to reconcile the new reality. The room, which had been filled with the usual hum of whispered conversations and self-assured glances, now buzzed with an undercurrent of uncertainty and dread. Every person present could sense the monumental shift in power, even if they dared not speak it aloud. I spoke again, my voice steady and filled with quiet triumph. "Today, this company is no longer a kingdom built on old grudges and false pride. Today, I reclaim not only my dignity, but also the future that was taken from me." My words resonated in the silence, each syllable measured and full of the weight of past injustices. I could see Samantha's eyes widen further, a silent plea for some form of mercy that she knew would not come. I had transformed every moment of humiliation into the strength that now surged within me. The documents lay there on the table, a symbol of my meticulous planning and the final blow to a system that had once looked down on me. In that instant, I felt as if the room itself acknowledged the change. The power dynamics had shifted irreversibly. No longer would I be the man underestimated and dismissed by those who once considered me a failure. The smile on my lips grew slowly as I realized that every sneer, every mocking remark, and every dismissive glance had only made me more determined. With a final, piercing look that cut through the thick tension, I let the truth settle in the room. The empire that Samantha once adored was now mine, and there was nothing left to say. The silence was complete, and in that quiet moment, I knew that I had not only won a legal battle, but had also claimed back every piece of my identity that had been stolen over the years. This was my big reveal, a moment of raw, unfiltered truth that left no room for denial. My eyes met hers one last time, and I silently promised that the journey to reclaim every bit of what was rightfully mine had only just begun. I watched Samantha's face contort as panic took hold of her features. Her voice, usually so smooth and confident, now rang out in a sharp tremor. "Dad, fix this," she cried out, her plea directed at Henry, whose expression had grown ashen. I could see her desperation in every quiver of her lip and the wild look in her eyes as she turned to him, expecting him to undo the chain of events that had unfolded. But Henry, as cold and unyielding as ever, remained silent. His silence spoke louder than any word he could have uttered. In that charged moment, I knew he understood perfectly well that this was no mistake. I could sense in the air that he realized I had outplayed all the plans he had laid out for years, and that nothing could now reverse the tide of fate. The tension in the room thickened as the sound of her phone buzzing cut through the heavy silence. Samantha's hand, already trembling from fear, jerked to grab the device. I saw the light from the screen dance across her face, painting her features with an eerie glow as she read the incoming message. The words that flashed on her screen confirmed her worst fear. Her position as VP had been revoked, a final blow that left her visibly shaken. In that brief moment, I felt a mix of satisfaction and regret. Satisfaction at seeing the full measure of my long-planned revenge, and regret for the pain that would now shatter the delicate illusion of her perfect world. Her eyes, wide with shock and betrayal, met mine across the table. "What did you do?" she managed to gasp, her voice cracking with disbelief. I stood slowly, adjusting the neat lines of my suit as if to reaffirm my newfound authority. Every motion I made was deliberate, every gesture calculated to underline the shift in power that had occurred. The room, filled with silent onlookers, seemed to hold its breath as I responded in a calm tone that belied the storm raging inside me. "I did what you never thought I could," I said simply, letting the weight of those words sink in. I could see the desperation in her eyes as she realized that everything she had built, every carefully constructed facade of wealth and superiority, was now crumbling around her. The shock was not just for her position in the company. It was for the realization that every moment of humiliation, every snide remark, and every dismissive glance from her family and friends had finally led to this decisive moment. I recalled the long nights spent alone, poring over business reports and legal documents, the relentless pursuit of a future that she had always assumed was beyond my reach. Those silent hours of planning had been my refuge and my rebellion. Now, they had all converged into one single, irrevocable act of retribution. I walked slowly around the table, my eyes never leaving hers, as I let the reality of the situation settle over us both. The room was dimly lit, but the stark expressions on everyone's faces illuminated the truth of our circumstances. Samantha's panic grew with every passing second. She reached out, her hand trembling, as if to grasp at the remnants of her once secure position. But there was nothing left to hold on to. The message on her phone had sealed her fate, and there was no reversing what had been done. Henry's face remained unreadable, a mask of cold indifference that only deepened the isolation she now felt. In that long, heavy silence, I could almost hear the echoes of every doubting whisper and every mocking laugh that had tormented me for years. I had been the man they all considered weak and insignificant, a failure unworthy of the world Samantha so adored. And yet, here I stood, having turned every slight into a stepping stone toward the power I now wielded. Every moment of their derision had only fueled my determination to prove them all wrong. The finality of that transformation was embodied in the revocation message that Samantha had just received, a digital decree that stripped her of both her authority and her pride. As the silence deepened, I felt a strange calm wash over me, a serene certainty born of long-awaited vindication. I knew that with every heartbeat, the scales of fate were tipping irrevocably in my favor. Samantha's eyes searched mine for an explanation, for some remnant of the warmth we once shared, but all she found was the unyielding reflection of a man who had embraced his true strength. "I did it," I said softly, yet firmly. "I did what I had to do. I took back what was mine, piece by piece, and now everything is as it should be." Her face twisted into a mixture of fear and fury as she realized that her desperate pleas and frantic gestures were powerless against the tide of change. In that charged moment, the gravity of our new reality pressed down on us both. I had long accepted the role of the underdog, the man who was underestimated and overlooked, but now I had stepped out of the shadows and into the harsh light of my own ambition. And as Samantha's eyes filled with tears of defeat, I knew that her desperation was the final piece in the puzzle of my transformation, a transformation that began with a simple, insulting coupon and had grown into an unstoppable force that would redefine everything she held dear. I felt a brief moment of triumph as I savored my victory, but before I could fully celebrate, a chill of disbelief crept over me. Just as I began to settle into the role of the new owner, Henry cleared his throat. His voice, calm yet laced with an unmistakable venom, cut through the thick silence in the boardroom. "This isn't over," he said slowly, his tone steady as if he were reciting a line from a long-rehearsed play. I looked up from the papers spread before me, and for a split second, my mind raced with the possibility that this might be another one of his cruel tricks. But his eyes were different now, cold, calculating, and determined to wrest control from me once again. Henry reached into his leather briefcase and produced a thick legal document. With a measured motion, he placed the paper on the table in front of me. The document's header caught my eye immediately. It was a contract that boldly declared I had transferred my shares to a holding company under his control. My heart pounded as I read the opening lines, each word seeming to taunt me with the suggestion that everything might be undone. In that moment, my carefully constructed plans, the many long nights spent poring over figures and legal codes, seemed to tremble under the weight of his challenge. I could almost taste the bitter irony. Just as I believed I had turned every slight into power, Henry was laying his own trap. My thoughts swirled as I looked at him. I had known that Henry was a master of his own game, and his reputation for playing dirty was well known. Yet I had never imagined that he would stoop to this. His document was not merely a piece of paper. It was a declaration of war, a final move meant to crush my rising dominance. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room shifting between us, each one searching for clues as to who would emerge victorious in this battle of wills. The air grew heavy as tension rose. I could hear the soft rustling of paper, the quiet murmurs of executives trying to make sense of what was unfolding. Even Samantha's eyes, still brimming with fear and disbelief, flicked nervously toward her father. Henry's words, quiet and deliberate, filled the room as he began to read aloud from his contract. With each sentence, I felt my carefully built foundation of power shudder. He claimed that I had willingly transferred my shares, a statement that was not only false but calculated to undermine everything I had achieved. For a moment, I was paralyzed by the shock of his betrayal. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks as I realized that my enemies had not yet given up their hold on the legacy of Blake Enterprises. Every slight and every insult I had endured seemed to gather in that moment of confrontation. Yet I did not let my shock show. Instead, I maintained a calm, steady gaze as I listened to Henry's recitation. The challenge in his tone was clear. He expected me to falter, to admit that I had been outmaneuvered by a man who had spent his life on the other side of success. In that quiet moment, my mind raced as I recalled every setback, every word of derision that had pushed me to this point. I thought of all the late nights and endless hours of study and strategy that had brought me here, and I realized that I had not come this far to simply fold in the face of one final act of treachery. I slowly reached into my briefcase, feeling the weight of my own documents that held the real truth of my ownership. With deliberate calm, I slid out the folder that contained evidence of every legal step I had taken, every contract that had cemented my position as the rightful owner. I met Henry's eyes with a steady glare that spoke volumes. This was not the moment for fear or regret. I had fought too long against the odds to be undone by a single document, no matter how cunningly crafted. The boardroom fell into a heavy silence as I took a measured breath and began to speak. "Henry," I said in a low, controlled tone, "you may have your contract, but you are mistaken if you believe it changes the truth." I explained clearly and simply how every share and every asset had been accounted for, how my actions had been recorded in documents far more binding than the one he had just produced. I told them that my shares had never been transferred, and that his contract was nothing more than a fraudulent setup, a desperate bid to reclaim power from the man they had always underestimated. I could see the flicker of uncertainty cross Henry's face as I laid out the evidence, each word steady and unyielding. I recalled the long nights when I felt like nothing more than a pawn in their game, the endless doubts about my worth. Now, in the glare of that boardroom, I turned every moment of humiliation into the strength that filled my voice. I watched as Henry's confident facade began to crumble, his eyes widening as he realized that his carefully laid trap was failing. The executives exchanged nervous glances, and even Samantha's eyes held a mix of disbelief and sorrow at the unraveling of her father's plan. I continued, explaining how every legal step I had taken was documented and verified, leaving no room for Henry's claims to take root. I told them that while he had tried to play the final move, my own strategy had anticipated every possibility, and his contract was but a mirage meant to distract from the truth. The words flowed steadily, each one reinforcing my resolve and diminishing the power of his deceit. I felt the anger and hurt from years of being underestimated transform into a cold, focused determination. As I finished speaking, the room was silent except for the sound of my own steady breathing. I could see the dawning realization in Henry's eyes, a mix of regret and fury that betrayed his inner turmoil. He had tried to strike back, but in doing so, he had only further confirmed the strength of my resolve. In that moment, I knew that I had not only defended my rightful place at the helm of Blake Enterprises, but had also sent a clear message to everyone present. No matter how many times they tried to bring me down, I would rise stronger with each blow. The battle lines were drawn, and though Henry's strike had been forceful, it was nothing compared to the power of my determination. Today, I reaffirmed my claim not just to the company, but to every piece of dignity that had been chipped away by their cruelty. Every detail of the day had been building toward this singular moment, a final move in a game of power and betrayal that I had been playing for years. I sat back in my chair, my eyes locked on Henry as he picked up the folder I had slid across the table earlier. The room held its breath, the air thick with the tension of impending reckoning. I could feel every heartbeat, every flicker of doubt in the eyes of the executives as they waited for the next move. The silence was palpable, as if the very walls of the boardroom were complicit in this battle of wills. I slowly opened the folder, revealing a series of meticulously organized documents that I had prepared long before today. Each page was a carefully laid trap designed to expose every loophole and every false move Henry had ever attempted. I watched his eyes widen as he scanned the first document, a dissolution agreement that I had signed 3 days ago. That single piece of paper was the keystone of my strategy. With that document, I had dissolved the parent company of Blake Enterprises and transferred every asset into a new, unassailable corporation. It was a move that not only stripped Henry of his leverage, but also rendered every fraudulent contract he had produced useless. I could see the disbelief in his expression as the executives exchanged murmurs. Samantha leaned forward, her earlier confidence evaporating into a mixture of fear and confusion as she tried to understand how her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. I met her gaze steadily, refusing to let the chaos around me shake my resolve. "This," I said softly, "is the dissolution agreement that I executed 3 days ago, a document that effectively nullifies any claim you have to this company." I continued to lay out the evidence. Every legal maneuver, every financial transfer, every secret meeting and long night of planning. I explained how the new corporation was not only immune to the machinations of the old empire, but was also built on a foundation of transparency and undeniable legality. The room seemed to shrink as the truth set in. Henry's face turned ashen, his confident posture now reduced to one of vulnerability. He had always assumed that I was too naive, too meek to challenge the established order, but now it was clear that every slight, every moment of humiliation had been transformed into a weapon in my arsenal. I recalled the days when I was dismissed as nothing more than Samantha's unsuccessful husband, a man without the vision or the strength to claim his due. Now, I was the architect of a new era, and every word I spoke in that boardroom was a step toward final vindication. I could see that the executives, who had once been complicit in Henry's schemes, were beginning to understand the gravity of my actions. Their eyes darted nervously between Henry and me, as if they were witnessing the undoing of a long-held belief system. I spoke of loyalty, of honor, and of the bitter price that comes from underestimating someone who has nothing left to lose. I detailed how my every action had been calculated not out of spite alone, but out of a deep-seated need to reclaim my identity, a person who had been shamed and cast aside for far too long. My voice grew stronger with each passing moment, resonating with the power of a man who had finally taken control of his destiny. You thought you could keep me in the shadows, I said, my tone calm yet unyielding. But today, I show you that every misstep, every insult, every moment of humiliation was a lesson that prepared me for this checkmate. The room erupted into a low, uncertain murmur as Henry's eyes filled with a mix of anger and despair. He reached for his own documents, his hands shaking as he tried to salvage what remained of his crumbling authority. But it was too late. I had already won the game with the dissolution agreement, a final, decisive blow that left no room for doubt. In that charged moment, as the truth unfolded on the glossy surface of each paper, I felt the overwhelming surge of triumph. The checkmate was complete. I had outmaneuvered every trap set before me, turning every insult into a stepping stone toward my victory. I knew that the balance of power had shifted irreversibly, and that from this moment forward, the name Blake Enterprises would no longer be associated with the old guard's arrogance. Instead, it would stand as a testament to the quiet resilience of a man who refused to be defined by the cruelty of others. I closed the folder gently, my eyes never leaving Henry's defeated gaze, and let the finality of the moment sink in. The game was over, and the board was mine. I turned slowly toward the board of directors, feeling every eye in the room watching me with a mix of fear and disbelief. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and spoke in a calm, unwavering voice that left no room for argument. My first executive decision, I announced, letting the words hang in the tense silence. I could see the shock ripple across Samantha's face, her perfectly composed mask cracking as she realized what was coming next. "You're fired," I declared, my tone firm and resolute. The room exploded with a mix of gasps and murmurs. Samantha's eyes grew wide, her hand flying to her mouth in a silent plea. "You can't," she shrieked, a note of panic creeping into her voice as the reality of her situation sank in. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow as I watched her confidence crumble. I had long endured the sneers, the silent judgment, and the cruelty of being treated as an afterthought in my own life. This moment was the culmination of years of quiet pain and relentless determination. It was the moment when I finally claimed what was rightfully mine. Two security officers stepped forward into the room, their presence underscoring the finality of the decision. Samantha's eyes pleaded for some sign of mercy, for the warmth of the man she once loved. But all she found was the unyielding resolve of someone who had suffered enough. I stood, smoothing the wrinkles from my suit as I maintained my gaze on her, determined to ensure that every word I spoke carried the weight of truth. "This company, the empire you have long relied on to hide your weaknesses, is now mine. It is no longer a place for deceit and empty promises." Each word echoed in the silent room, a reminder that every moment of humiliation I had endured had only strengthened me. As the security officers moved closer to escort Samantha from the room, I could almost feel the shift in the air. The executives, who had once shared in her false sense of security, now looked at me with cautious admiration. Their eyes, filled with both fear and respect, mirrored the realization that a new era was beginning, one that I would lead with honesty and strength. I knew that this decision was more than just a business maneuver. It was a declaration that the old order, built on lies and entitlement, was finally over. I continued to address the room, my voice softer now, but still resolute. Today is not just about firing one person. It is about setting things right. For too long, this company has been a tool for those who have oppressed me and many others. I have taken every insult, every slight, and turned them into lessons. And now, I am here to lead us into a future where merit and hard work are valued above all else. I could see the heads nodding, a subtle shift in attitude taking root among those who had silently witnessed my rise. It was as if the room itself recognized the injustice that had been dealt for years, and now, at last, it was ready to embrace a new beginning. Samantha, still struggling against the reality of her downfall, tried to speak once more, but her voice faltered as the security officers gently but firmly guided her away. Her eyes met mine one last time, filled with a mixture of defiance and desperation. In that moment, I felt a pang of regret for the love we once shared, even as I stood resolute in my decision. This was not just a victory for me, but a final reckoning for everything that had been built on false pride and cruelty. I returned to my seat at the head of the table, feeling the weight of every past humiliation lighten with the knowledge that the future was now mine to command. The boardroom, which had once echoed with the laughter of those who saw me as weak, was now silent in awe of the power that had been reclaimed. Every decision, every step I had taken to build my strength, had led to this turning point. I was no longer the man who endured humiliation in silence. I was the leader of a company reborn, a company that would no longer tolerate the arrogance and greed of its past. As the day wore on, I began to outline my vision for the future. I spoke of new policies and fresh ideas, of a culture built on respect, transparency, and hard work. I listened carefully to the murmurs of approval from the executives, their faces gradually reflecting hope instead of fear. In that moment, I realized that the downfall of the old guard was not just a personal victory. It was the beginning of a transformation that would redefine everything we stood for. My heart pounded with a mix of relief and determination. I knew that there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew that I had the strength to overcome them. The downfall of those who had once looked down on me was the first step toward a brighter future, a future where every person was valued for their contributions rather than their connections or status. In the quiet moments that followed, as I sat back and absorbed the gravity of what had just transpired, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. The pain of the past had given way to a fierce resolve, and with each passing second, the new order I was building became more real. This was my moment to lead, to show that true power came not from wealth or entitlement, but from perseverance, integrity, and the willingness to stand up when no one else would. And as the day drew to a close, I knew that the downfall of the old regime was complete, a downfall that would forever mark the end of an era and the beginning of a legacy built on justice and strength. The tension in the room was at its peak when I heard the sound of security officers moving in. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I watched Samantha, her face now a mixture of rage and desperation, turn to her father. "Dad, do something," she cried, her voice cracking with a panic I had never heard before. But Henry, who had always been the one to control the situation with cold indifference, looked away as if he had expected nothing less from me. In that moment, the room seemed to shrink, every eye fixed on the unfolding drama. I could see the doubt in the eyes of the top executives and even catch a glimpse of fear in the eyes of those who had once admired her. Before anyone could react further, Henry's phone began to buzz on the table, its screen lighting up with a new message. The device, usually a silent extension of his authority, now seemed to carry the weight of fate. His expression shifted from one of steely resolve to confusion and dread. The speakerphone crackled to life, and a deep, measured voice came through, saying, "Mr. Blake, the SEC has just opened an investigation into your finances." I felt a slight, almost satisfied, smile form on my lips as I listened. The sound of his lawyer's words cut through the silence like a knife. Henry's jaw clenched visibly, and his face drained of color in a way that made me feel both vindicated and oddly sorrowful. I couldn't help but chuckle softly, thinking how ironic it was that the man who had tried so hard to keep control would now be undone by his own greed. I had sent a full audit of Blake Enterprises to the authorities long before today, a move that had been planned carefully, step by step, even as everyone doubted my capability. The revelation of this audit was a final twist in our long, bitter game of power and betrayal. In that moment, I realized that every betrayal, every word of derision, and every calculated slight had led to this turning point. As Henry's face turned from shock to fury, the security officers moved in with determined precision. They stepped forward, seizing Samantha by the arms, their grip firm and unyielding. She struggled for a brief moment, her eyes blazing with anger as she glared at me. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and defiance. I leaned in slightly, letting my words drop like heavy stones in the silence. "Oh, Samantha, it was over the moment you handed me that $15 coupon," I replied, my tone low and almost conversational despite the chaos around us. The words hung in the air, echoing off the polished walls of the boardroom. For years, I had endured the humiliation of being seen as nothing more than a failure, a shadow in the grand scheme of their lives. Now, As security dragged her away and her protests faded into the background, I felt a bittersweet satisfaction. The betrayal was complete. Not only had Samantha sided with those who looked down on me, but her father, the very man who should have stood by her, had been rendered powerless by his own machinations. The room, once filled with the smug assurance of the elite, now buzzed with a new, raw energy. I could see Henry trying to gather himself, his eyes darting between the phone and the scattered documents on the table. The air was thick with the realization that the rules had changed. His attempt to control the situation with a single fraudulent contract and a last-minute legal ploy had backfired spectacularly. Every minute detail of our power struggle had led to this moment of complete collapse. I recalled every long night spent in solitude, every time I had been mocked and dismissed, and I knew that my actions were not driven solely by revenge. They were the culmination of years of silent determination and the deep need to reclaim my dignity. Even as the authorities were informed and Henry's world began to crumble under the weight of an impending SEC investigation, I maintained my calm. I watched as the board members exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of shock and reluctant admiration. It was as if they finally saw the man behind the quiet persistence, the man who had endured endless betrayal and humiliation only to rise up at the very moment when it mattered the most. I could feel the finality of the shift in power, a sense of liberation that spread through my veins. In that charged atmosphere, I understood that betrayal had many faces. Samantha's desperate pleas, Henry's final act of defiance, and even the cold, calculated intervention of the security team were all parts of a larger story. A story where I was no longer the forgotten husband or the underestimated man. Instead, I had become the one who redefined every rule they once held sacred. The sound of sirens in the distance, approaching the building, seemed to underscore the inevitability of justice. As the reality of arrest and the collapse of an empire set in, I felt a surge of quiet triumph. I had turned every betrayal into an opportunity, every moment of scorn into a stepping stone toward the life I had long envisioned. The boardroom fell into a heavy silence once more as the security officers led Samantha away, and Henry stared at his phone with a defeated expression. The taste of betrayal was bitter, but it was a price I was willing to pay for the future I had fought so hard to secure. In that final moment, as the old order crumbled around us and the promise of a new beginning loomed large, I knew that I had not only survived but had triumphed. The lesson was clear. Those who betray and underestimate will one day face the full force of consequences. And today, justice had finally arrived. That night, I found myself alone in the quiet expanse of my penthouse, the chaos of the day slowly fading into the deep shadows of evening. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of smooth whiskey in my hand, and gazed out over a city that now felt like it was mine for the taking. The lights below flickered like distant promises of a new beginning, each one a testament to the change that had swept through my life. For years, I had been cast aside, underestimated, and ridiculed by those who prided themselves on their wealth and status. But tonight, as I watched the city hum with possibility, I knew that the tables had turned. The empire that was once a symbol of my deepest humiliation was now mine to mold and command. The journey to this moment had not been simple. Every slight, every sneer, and every moment of rejection had pushed me to work in silence, building a fortress of determination and strategy. I remembered the countless nights spent hunched over documents, planning every step of my revenge and success. Even when I was labeled as nothing more than Samantha's unsuccessful husband, I refused to let their judgments define me. Each bitter word had fueled a fire within, one that grew stronger with every passing day, until it blazed into a force that even the most powerful could not ignore. Now, as I sipped my whiskey and felt its warmth spread through me, I embraced the reality that I had finally seized control. I moved slowly to the expansive living area, where modern art and sleek furniture bore silent witness to the transformation of a life once filled with sorrow and rejection. My mind drifted back to the boardroom, to every tense moment when I had stood up to those who had humiliated me. I recalled Samantha's desperate eyes, the anger in Henry's voice, and the finality of each decision that had led me to this point. It was as if every sacrifice, every secret battle fought in the silence of my heart, had been guiding me toward this very night. I had not only taken over a company, I had reclaimed my dignity and rebuilt my self-worth from the ground up. The new empire I now ruled was not built solely on legal maneuvers and strategic documents. It was built on the long, arduous road of perseverance. I had learned that true power came not from the wealth inherited or the connections one was born into, but from the resilience to stand up after every fall. I remembered the sting of every mocking remark and every dismissive glance. I remembered how I was made to feel small in the presence of those who looked down on me. And yet, I had taken all those moments, all that bitterness, and transformed them into a plan that left no room for doubts or regrets. Now, the empire that Samantha had worshipped was a symbol of what I had overcome, a beacon of my hard-won victory. In the silence of my penthouse, the city outside mirrored my inner state, calm, yet teeming with potential. I walked over to the large desk by the window and spread out the documents that had secured my position. Each page was a record of my battles, every clause and signature a reminder of how far I had come. I ran my fingers over the crisp paper, feeling the weight of my decisions and the promise of the future. The empire I had taken was more than a company. It was a new life, a future unburdened by the failures of the past. Tonight, I was not a man defined by the cruelty of others, but a man reborn, free to shape my destiny on my own terms. I poured another measure of whiskey into my glass, its amber hue reflecting the determination in my eyes. The room, though quiet, seemed to echo with the memories of every victory and every defeat that had led me here. I remembered the whispers of doubt that once filled my mind, the voices that said I would never rise above the shadows. And now, as I stood alone, the soft hum of the city a constant companion, I felt a profound sense of liberation. I had taken down the empire that had once symbolized my humiliation, and in doing so, I had rewritten the narrative of my life. Every betrayal, every tear, every moment of loneliness had been a stepping stone toward the future I now embraced. I sat down in my leather chair, feeling the cool, smooth surface beneath my hands, a stark contrast to the burning passion that now defined me. I allowed myself a moment of reflection, thinking about the cost of victory and the promise of redemption. The journey was far from over. There were still battles to be fought and obstacles to overcome. Yet, in that moment, I was filled with an unwavering hope. I knew that my strength came from the hardships I had endured and the courage to face them head-on. With every challenge, I had grown wiser, more resilient, and more determined to build something that would last beyond the fleeting moments of revenge. Now, as I looked out over the city, I could almost see the future unfolding, a future where my empire would stand as a monument to perseverance, justice, and the unyielding power of the human spirit. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the man I had become, a man who had taken his destiny into his own hands, who had turned every slight into a stepping stone toward greatness. The night was quiet, yet alive with the promise of new beginnings. In the deep stillness of my penthouse, with the city as my witness, I vowed that this empire would not only be a legacy of my triumph, but also a beacon for all who had ever been cast aside. I was no longer defined by my past, but by the strength and determination that had carried me to this moment of undeniable power and newfound freedom.